reshoring enough to offset offshoring? Which one is larger? What's going to be the net effect here? So that's what I do here. This is what I've done in my recent policy brief that my comments today are based on. And just to ruin the punchline here, what we're going to see is that actually this is not a huge widespread trend. That yes, we do see reshoring by firms, but it is far overshadowed by new outsourcing by other firms, and in many cases, even by the same firms who are themselves announcing new reshoring initiatives. So I'll show you that data, but then I want to spend the rest of the time thinking about what the implications are. If we don't see massive reshoring, is this a bad thing for U.S. workers, for U.S. consumers, U.S. competitors, and competitiveness? Well, not necessarily. So I'll talk about some of those implications as well. So here, this is just some data on offshoring by U.S. multinational firms. So the blue line here is imports. These are manufacturing imports by U.S. multinationals from the foreign affiliates that they own in other countries. So this is weighted by sales. So for the blue line, you can see in the last year available, 2012, it's a little over 6, almost 7% of the total value of sales is comprised by imports from these foreign affiliates of multinationals. So first of all, it's still a relatively small number, 7% of the within-firm offshoring, but it's been growing steadily still. And the red line is the similar measure, but instead of imports from affiliates within the firm, these are the arm's length imports. So this is offshoring outside the firm, buying from third-party suppliers in other countries. And these have both, since 2009, when we first started seeing reports of reshoring, these have both continued to increase, right? So you might say, well, okay, but it looks like it might be flattening out a little bit there around 2012. This is the most recent data we have on the multinationals, but if you look at more recent data from the U.S. Census, which goes through 2014, and looks at all trade, not just multinationals, you can see there is a continued increasing trend even since 2012. So, there doesn't seem to be any trend. We do see the reshoring. It's real. There are firms who are making these decisions to bring back production, but it's not so large. Even 6 years after we've started hearing all this buzz, it's not so large as to offset the increases in offshoring, which are still much larger in magnitude than the increases in reshoring that we've seen. So, how could this be? We hear all these stories. We have our 8,000 or 9,000 Google News search results on reshoring. Why doesn't this add up to any visible effect in the data? And the answer is, not surprising to anyone who really understands how global commerce works, right? Value chains are very complex, especially international value chains, and it's not surprising that, across firms in different industries, we're going to see different sourcing strategies for firms in electronics, in semiconductors, in refrigerators, in steel, and so forth. But even within the same firm, firms are using not just one monolithic strategy, but a number of different strategies for their different products and for their different stages of production. And so here's just a few examples of, a couple of the firms that were on that first slide that I showed you as examples of firms with highly publicized reshoring activities that have also been expanding their offshoring at the same time that they've been expanding their reshoring.
The project was inspired by widespread criticism of avoidance of taxes by multinational corporations. And it's very important, if you're in the tax world, there's a big distinction between avoidance and evasion. Evasion is breaking the law. These companies, for the most part, I won't say 100%, but for a very large portion, they respect all the laws in every country where they do business, all the tax laws. So we're not talking about evasion here, we're talking about avoidance, and avoidance is in the eye of the beholder. So, you're the beholder and you're somewhat antagonistic towards what Apple might be doing or Starbucks or Google or whatever, and you'll call it a loophole. The Obama administration has largely, but not entirely supported the BEPS project, and the deeper we got in, the more the administration meaning really the Treasury has developed some qualms. But equally important, key congressmen, by which I mean Senator Hatch and Senator Schumer, Democrat, and Congressman Ryan, and some Democrats on the House side, they are quite skeptical. Now, because of interactions between the U.S. existing tax system and the BEPS recommendations, that combination, I can get only one point across, it's the combination of our existing tax system, which I believe is the worst in the world as far as competing countries go, and layered on top the possible BEPS recommendation, which makes U.S. multinational corporations the main target. As mentioned, some countries are already implementing some parts of the BEPS recommendation. It's 15 actions, a lot of individual points in there to attack U.S. multinational. Now just think about it if you're a finance minister and you need to raise money. I mean, what is the target which can least defend itself? First, it's a multinational, and second, it's a foreign multinational. So that means an American multinational. So American multinationals have already, thanks to this project, faced higher taxes in such countries as Australia, the UK, and France, and others. Our corporate tax system already encourages firms to invert. They discourage innovation and investment. Now, we have a lot of good things going in this economy, so on balance, we get a lot of innovation and we get investment, not as much as we need, but we get quite a bit. If we layered BEPS on top of these existing bad practices, it would compound the bad side of the incentives. So our first and strongest recommendation is that Congress should align U.S. corporate taxation with global norms and, as I said at the beginning, higher household taxes on which households are the way and the only way to address equity.
From a U.S. perspective, concern, this is Huffbauer et al. From our perspective, concern should transcend tax rules in favor of the prosperities of U.S. firms, growth, jobs, R&D. But surely collecting tax revenues and growth and innovation are not exclusive. In this sense, there's kind of a missing counterfactual. What would happen to growth, jobs, R&D, budget deficits, the ability to do some of the things that Lindsay was asking for, by the way, including retraining and offsetting some of the negative impacts of offshoring, if, in fact, we punt on the revenues that we're losing through tax avoidance of MNCs. Third, BEPS seeks to move the legal goalposts, and that may inflict significant damage on U.S. economic interests. It's not obvious that paying taxes kills innovation. In fact, one could make an argument, and I'd be tempted to do so, that tax avoidance kills innovation. And the fact that General Electric has about 1,000 tax lawyers on staff strikes me as not a very optimal idea. The fact that Apple has to go through all kinds of machinations to create double Dutch Irish sandwiches strikes me as not what Apple ought to be good at. So again, I felt the paper was much too assertive in just assuming that somehow complying with tax codes kills innovation. The problem, base erosion and profit shifting, the fact of transfer pricing, these are all problems, just summarizing what Gary and the team found. The loss of revenue is a serious problem to which the paper doesn't, I think, go deeply into quite enough. And then the paper acknowledges that something you have to balance here are the equity issues that Gary raised. And the solutions, to some extent, are get rid of the corporate income tax, and then I'm not sure what else happens, and somehow you achieve revenue neutrality. So I'm confused about step 2, and I'll ask a bit more about that as we go on. I think Gary makes a great point that there's really a lack of quantitative analysis of the magnitude of the problem from lots of places here. And Jane Gravel argues that 25% of corporate tax revenues, 0.6% of GDP are squandered through BEPS, the kinds of avoidance schemes that BEPS is trying to solve. The IMF on the left has an estimate with a very wide confidence range, that's that line there, on the cost of tax avoidance among multinationals in the OECD and non-OECD countries, and they're not trivial. My colleague Chai-Ching Huang has shown that 43% of U.S. multinational foreign profits are booked abroad, and yet the foreign workforce in those MNCs is tiny relative to their profits, so that looks to us like profits being booked versus more of a tax avoidance scheme.
So the two papers, I'm going to start with Lindsay's paper because that's where the presentation started. And, I think certainly the bulk of the paper is reshoring happening. Is it a major phenomenon? I would completely agree with Lindsay, maybe for different reasons and draw different conclusions, that the anecdotes that were told and got a lot of attention and everybody got very excited about the idea that American companies that had outsourced had changed their mind and were bringing stuff back to the United States was a little overblown. And we look at the manufacturing job numbers every week and every month and try to sort of figure out what the trends are. And we never saw the fabulous trend, as Lindsay pointed out. We aren't back at the pre-recession level of manufacturing employment. So whatever's going on, it's not at a scale that is really having a big impact. But the second part, what does it all mean, is where I think I might diverge from Lindsay's analysis. And I would sum up her answer is, don't worry, it's fine. Offshoring is good for everyone. It's great for the economy. It's great for employment. And if you want to take the conclusion, and this is where I think there's going to be some connections between the two papers, the U.S. is perfectly competitive in a global economy, and we can keep doing what we've been doing. We need to look forward, not look back. I agree we need to look forward. I'm not trying to recreate the manufacturing prowess of the 1950s in the United States, but I think there is somewhere in between everything's fabulous, because if you look at a couple of markers, whether it's the trade deficit and something like advanced technology products or manufacturing, or you look at the failure of the United States to invest adequately in infrastructure and skills and education and research and development. You look at the tax structure, and that goes to Gary's paper, and income inequality, and particularly, what happens to the income of non-college educated workers who are still, almost 2/3 of the U.S. labor force. And if you take all those pieces together, and I think also if you take yourself on a field trip to the Mideast or to the Midwest or the Southeast of the United States, and you see a lot of really devastated communities and all the ramifications that have come, it's hard to be so sanguine. And certainly for me, representing American workers at the AFL-CIO, we don't see it.